Welcome back, everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be addressing the question, what is philosophy? Now, I've designed this video for my students to supplement what we do in class, but I'm sure that anybody who's interested in the topic will benefit from the information. So let's get into it. So when I was first planning this presentation, I thought about starting by anticipating some of the misconceptions, misunderstandings about what philosophy is, and then coming up with a list of things that misconceptions that people have about philosophy and talking about how philosophy isn't any of those things. But I quickly realized that there are all kinds of misconceptions about what philosophy is, and I can't possibly anticipate them all. So instead of doing any of that, I'm just going to start by getting right into it and giving you what I think is a good definition of what philosophy is. Philosophy is thinking carefully about the most important questions of life so that we can find the true answers to those questions for the ultimate purpose of human flourishing. That, I think, is a good, clear, straightforward definition of what philosophy is. Now, this calls for some breakdown, looking at some specific elements of that definition so that you have a better understanding of what I'm talking about here as I define what philosophy is. So let me just go through and highlight certain aspects of this definition and talk to you about what each of these aspects means, or give you more explanation about what it is. First of all, philosophy is thinking carefully. Philosophers engage in very careful thinking. What is thinking carefully? Well, that means a lot of different things, but there's a few things that come to my mind about what thinking carefully means. First of all, it means thinking logically, using logic and ordered thinking as we consider important ideas and important questions. And so in any introduction to philosophy class, including the one that I teach, very early in the class we talk about logic, because logic is essential. It's an essential building block to help us learn how to think carefully so that we can begin to find the answers to the big questions that we're talking about. So thinking carefully means thinking logically. Thinking carefully also means using precise definitions. In philosophy, we're very concerned about using words in particular ways and not mixing up the way we're using those words, or equivocating is what that's called, where you use a word one way and then suddenly you change the definition without really paying attention to that, and then you get all mixed up. So we want to use good definitions, we want to use precise definitions, and of course we want to use the specialized terminology that's in the field of philosophy. We want to use that terminology very carefully. Just like any other field of study, philosophy has its own jargon, its own special list of terms that mean specific things in the context of philosophy. And some of the words that we use in philosophy are used in other fields or even in casual conversation. But typically when that happens, those words mean something else. They mean something different. So we use specialized terminology so that we can be precise and clear, so that we know what in the world we're talking about as we go through the topics we examine in philosophy. Thinking carefully also involves uncovering hidden assumptions. Let's talk about hidden assumptions for just a minute here. When I'm talking about a hidden assumption, I mean a belief that somebody has that's not explicitly stated in the course of the conversation. That's what I mean by hidden. It's there, the assumption is being made, and the things that are being said are assuming that, whatever it is, but it's hidden. It's not explicitly stated. And when I say it's a hidden assumption, what I mean to say is that these things then form the foundation or basis of what the person is saying, or the decision that they have made. So I come along, I'm saying something very important, and I don't say it very clearly, but whatever it is I am saying is based on an assumption that I'm not clearly saying. And so part of what we have to do in philosophy, in order to clearly understand one another, to get at the heart of what these ideas and questions are, we have to learn how to see what somebody is saying and then uncover the assumption that's behind what they're saying. I've got there on the screen a picture I just Googled the term iceberg, and this is one of the pictures that popped up. That's supposed to be a picture of an iceberg. I'm not sure if that's an actual photograph. It doesn't look like it's an actual photograph. Maybe it's some sort of AI generated thing or whatever. But anyway, that's what icebergs look like, according to my understanding, what people have told me. And the point that I want to make is, if you look in that picture where the water line, what you see above the waterline, imagine you're in a boat or something going across the ocean and you see an iceberg. What you actually see is only that little tippy top part that's sticking above the waterline. And I'm using this as a metaphor for people's communication of their ideas and beliefs. Let's say what's above the waterline is what the person says. It's what they actually say. And what we have to recognize is that when someone makes a claim about something, that claim, what they say that they believe, is always based on a huge portion of other beliefs and ideas. And that's what I'm saying hidden assumptions are like. So part of what we do in philosophy when we're thinking carefully about what people are saying is we're trying to get below the waterline. We're trying to get into what isn't said and uncover that and expose it so that we can see what assumptions, what beliefs, what ideas are forming the foundation of whatever it is being talked about on the surface. So philosophy is engaged in the practice of uncovering those hidden assumptions. The next aspect of our definition here is the topic. What is philosophy about? Philosophy is about the most important questions of life. So when we say that philosophy is thinking carefully, it's not just thinking carefully about any old topic, although that is a characteristic of philosophical thinking. Specifically in the field of philosophy, we're going to think about the most important questions of life. And I've got a list here that I put on the screen of what are some examples or example topic areas from which these most important questions come. So some example topics, right? Reality. And one of the most important questions you could ask is, what is real or what exists? And maybe even now you're thinking about some obvious things that you think exist. But it's really important to think through that carefully so that we understand what's real and what exists. Not that we're ever going to come to a good and complete answer, but that's the kind of thing we're exploring in philosophy. We want to know what's real, what exists, and perhaps what isn't real and what doesn't exist. Knowledge is another important field. What is knowledge? How do we get it? How do we know? How do we know that we know? What counts as knowledge and what doesn't count as knowledge? Humanity. What is the fundamental nature of a human person? What does it mean to be a human person? What characteristics go along with that? And so forth. Morality. What is good or what is valuable or what is right or what is wrong? Philosophers address questions in that topic as well. And finally, meaning, and this is perhaps the most significant one, the question of meaning. What is the meaning of life? Is there any meaning of life? And if so, what is that meaning? And how do we know what the meaning is? Now, if you're familiar with these sorts of topics, you might recognize that when we talk about these kinds of questions, we typically would call that a worldview, right? We talk about the worldview. A worldview is simply a big picture, a paradigm, how you see the world, quite literally, and how you see the world is a combination of all the things that you believe about all these important areas. And that worldview then essentially becomes a filter or an interpretive paradigm. When you get new information, you tend to filter it through your set of beliefs about these important questions. So, for example, if you wake up in the middle of the night and the room is very dark and you look out and you see, across the room or whatever, what appears to you to be a ghost, right? You see what appears to you to be a ghost. Well, if your worldview, if your view of what kinds of things exist and don't exist, if your view of reality does not include ghosts, right? If you have this fundamental belief about the nature of reality such that ghosts don't exist, then you'll see across the room what appears to be a ghost, but you won't believe that it's a ghost. You won't think it's a ghost at all because you have this worldview that says there's no such thing as ghosts. And that's how our worldview comes into play. But these are the kinds of questions in these topic areas that we address in the field of philosophy. In my Introduction to Philosophy class, we talk about questions exactly in these topic areas. We have a specific order that we go through, and we talk about some specific aspects of these topics, but this is the kind of thing that you should expect to talk about in an Introduction to Philosophy class. So, philosophy is thinking about the most important questions of life. This next area of my definition is the why. Why are we examining these questions? We're examining these questions because we want to know the true answers to the questions. That's why philosophers are engaged in their careful thinking about these topics. It's because we want to know what the right answers are in these topics, right? So from a philosophical perspective, what is it that philosophers want? Well, philosophers want to believe what's true, and they want to not believe what's false. Now, it's much more than this. I understand. I'm just giving you an introduction to the kind of mindset that comes along with the philosophical way of life. Philosophers want to believe what's true, want to align our beliefs with actual reality, and we want to make sure that there aren't beliefs that we have that don't fit with reality, that are contrary to reality. So we want to believe what's true and not believe what's false. So you might be familiar with this language that people use when we talk specifically about things like college education or education in general. Oftentimes people will talk about how important it is to develop critical thinking skills. And of course it is. It is important to develop critical thinking skills. But that's not nearly enough. Not nearly enough, right? Because if you have really good critical thinking skills, but you are not committed, as the philosopher is, to figuring out what's true and what's false, if you're not committed to finding what's true and believing that, adopting all the true things into your belief system, if you're not committed to doing that, then critical thinking skills, all they're going to do is help you become dogmatic about whatever you believe, whether what you believe is true or not. So critical thinking skills, as essential as they are, fall well short of what we need to do philosophy. In philosophy, we want to find out what's true. And so in many ways, philosophy is not a 15-week semester-long class. It is a way of life. It's a way of life that's marked by truth-seeking way of life. And so, in one manner of speaking, when you begin to realize what that means or the significance of what it means to live a truth-seeking way of life, you quickly realize that this is risky. It's a risky kind of an enterprise. Now, you don't actually have to engage in philosophy. I'm just trying to describe for you what's at stake when somebody does engage in philosophy or does seek to live a truth-seeking way of life. The risk is that if you're committed to finding what's true and believing that, and figuring out which of your beliefs are false and getting rid of them, if you're committed to that up front, then obviously the risk is that you might find out that you're wrong. And you might find out that you're wrong about something that's very, very important to you. One of your deeply held, cherished beliefs, let's say a belief about God, some sort of religious belief, or belief that you have about yourself, or about people that you have relationships with. If you are committed to finding what's true and believing what's true and disbelieving what's false, then you run the risk of figuring out or finding out that one of your beliefs is false. So up front, you have to be willing to give up those beliefs. Not that you have to resign yourself at the beginning that your beliefs are false. That's not what I mean. But if you're committed to believing what's true, you have to be willing to accept the possibility that some of them are false, if you're committed to figuring out what really is true. On the flip side of that, of course, the truth-seeking way of life ends up being very comforting. In fact, you will get more comfort and assurance and confidence than you would if you didn't commit to taking that risk of figuring out that some of your beliefs are false. Because if you do adopt a truth-seeking way of life, if you're willing to seek truth, you're going to end up being much more confident than you ever were before, because all of your beliefs that you have will be hard fought, right, and tested through rigorous philosophical examination. So you'll get the kind of confidence that you otherwise couldn't have. So again, philosophers want to believe what's true and not believe what's false, right? We want to find the true answers to those most important questions of life. Well, is that it? Or do we just want truth for truth's sake? No, that's not it at all. The ultimate purpose of any philosophical activity is what I'm going to call human flourishing. Human flourishing. You might have heard of the philosopher by the name of Socrates, who died in about 400 years before Christ, and is famous for this line, the quotation that's on the screen there: "The unexamined life is not worth living." Well, the backstory of that famous quotation is this. Socrates had a reputation of going around Athens asking all the Athenians lots of very difficult, very important worldview-ish questions, the kind of questions that philosophers are trying to answer. And people got upset about that because they realized, on the one hand, they realized that the questions Socrates were asking were super important questions. They were really, really vital life questions. But on the other hand, they also began to realize very quickly that they did not have good answers to those questions. And so Socrates was making them very uncomfortable. So uncomfortable that they arrested him and put him on trial. Of course, it was trumped up charges. The actual charges were atheism and corrupting the young. That's what he was charged with. And so they brought in all sorts of witnesses to make up lies about Socrates and say things about him that were bad and all that kind of stuff. And of course, he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to death, right? He was sentenced to death for being a philosopher. And at the very end of the trial, of course, they come to him with a way out. They say, "Socrates, listen, nobody really wants this. Nobody wants you to die. No, this isn't a good look for any of us. So we want to make a way out here. You don't have to die. You don't have to. We won't have the death penalty in this case on one condition." And they had this poison, this hemlock poison that he was going to have to drink. That was the method of executing him. That was the method for carrying out the death penalty. And they said, "Socrates, you don't have to drink the hemlock. You don't have to drink the hemlock. You don't have to drink the poison on one condition. If you will promise to stop asking all of these hard questions, if you promise to leave us alone," or in contemporary world today, we might say, "Let people believe whatever they want to believe. Stop bothering them. Let people have their own opinions. Let them have their own beliefs. Just leave us alone. Stop asking all these hard questions and we'll let you go. You don't have to drink the hemlock. You don't have to die. You can live out the rest of your natural life." And Socrates was like, "Wait a minute. You're giving me the choice of either the death penalty or stop asking the questions that philosophers like to ask." He says, "Hey, bring on the hemlock." He says the unexamined life, which is the kind of life they were asking him to live, the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates was pointing to the idea that living the philosophical life, the life where we try to figure out the answers to these hard questions, is a flourishing life. It's a fulfilling life. That's the kind of life that philosophers want to achieve. The goal is to find out how to live a full, meaningful, abundant kind of a life, the kind of life that is worth living. And so in this way of looking at it then, philosophy is living the examined life. The ancient Greeks had this word that they used, eudaimonia or eudaimonia, however you want to pronounce it. And the word just means good spirit, but the way they used that word was to refer to excellence, flourishing, or we might say being what we were meant to be, living the kind of life that we were meant to live. And the goal of philosophy is this excellence, this flourishing. In fact, the term philosophy, if you think about the word philosophy, even in that word, you see some of this, right? The word philosophy comes from two Greek words that mean love and wisdom. So in many ways, philosophy is loving wisdom, not just getting true answers for the sake of having true answers. No, it's to discover wisdom and a good life. Philosophy is about how to have a full, meaningful, abundant, flourishing, excellent kind of life where the philosopher looks at his life and says, yeah, this is how things were meant to be. This is what philosophy is after. Now, I want to just maybe make a comment here that I think should be a matter of common sense, but for some reason or another, it's not. I want to try to direct your attention to the relationship between having true beliefs and flourishing. And the simple common sense claim that I want to make that I think should be obvious, I don't think it should be controversial, even though it probably is in today's world, that true beliefs bring flourishing, excellence, the abundant, meaningful kind of life that we all want to live. True beliefs allow for flourishing. False beliefs prevent flourishing. So what I'm trying to say is that what you believe about yourself, about reality, about morality, about God, about the nature of existence, what you believe actually impacts whether or not you will have a flourishing, excellent life. And what I'm suggesting is that when you believe things that are false, in other words, you think reality is one way, but it's actually not that way, that is going to prevent you from flourishing, right? On that picture is a picture of, I think it's holly berries, and my understanding is that holly berries are poisonous. I've not tested that personally, and that's part of my point here. Look, this is very simple. If I sincerely and confidently believe that it is nutritious food, but it's actually poison, I'm not going to have a good life. I'm just going to repeat that. If I sincerely and confidently believe that it is nutritious food, but it's actually poison, I'm definitely not going to have a good life. I'm definitely not going to have a good life. When my beliefs, no matter how sincere, no matter how confident, no matter how passionate, no matter how much I love them, no matter how important they are to me, when my beliefs conflict with reality, this will cause me great trouble in my life. Now, this is the kind of conversation I would encourage you to have in person with your friends and with me if you're one of my students in class, right? But the point that I'm trying to make is if my beliefs conflict with reality, it will tend to bring anxiety, trouble, suffering, confusion, turmoil, right? This is what this will tend to bring. And if my beliefs align with reality, if my beliefs match with reality as it is, then this will tend to bring assurance, tranquility, endurance through hardship, calm, and understanding. So, there you have it. There's my definition of philosophy. Philosophy is thinking carefully about the most important questions of life so we can find the true answers to those questions for the ultimate purpose of human flourishing. Now, let me just say a couple of other things here. And this is something that I don't particularly say in person in my classes. So if you're one of my students, maybe this will be important to think about. In one sense, of course, philosophy is an activity. It's something that you do, right? You ask a hard question, an important life question, a worldview kind of question. You think about what the question means. You think about and assemble terminology that will help you analyze the question. You think about logic and how the ideas pertaining to that question are logically interrelated and all those sorts of things. It's an activity that you do. And so, like when we have a semester-long introduction to philosophy class, there will be moments like your assignments and things like that where you will get the chance to actually engage in philosophy. And even though this is an introduction, you're not going to do it very much, but you will do some philosophy. So philosophy is an activity. But the other thing, I suppose, that should come out in this definition that I hope that is occurring to you is that philosophy is also a particular kind of attitude. It's a disposition that we have in our minds and our hearts about reality and about my place in it, right? A philosophy is the kind of attitude that somebody has. Maybe you could say it's an intentional attitude. You're not going to just sit back and let life happen to you, right? I meet many college students, and for that matter, I meet many adults outside of the context of the college classroom, and it's almost as if they're just sort of passively going through life and letting things happen to them, right? And sometimes you'll hear it in the way we talk. Well, maybe you get a job offer, and so you think of this as something that is given to you from the outside, or you're whatever it is, you're given a homework assignment and you take it, or something you get in a car crash. It's something that happens to you, or you get fired from a job, and this is something that happens to you. And whatever it might be, all the different events in your life, you just sort of view yourself as a more or less passive participant, a victim, a recipient of all these things that are happening to you in the universe. A philosopher does not look at life that way. And I actually think it's bad for you to look at life that way. You should not see yourself as a passive participant, a passive victim of things that are happening to you. You should begin to see yourself as an active agent in your own life, to be in charge of your own life. So a philosophy perspective, a philosophical perspective, a philosopher is going to take an intentional approach at life, a active, engaged approach at life, where you're going to think about in advance all of the important questions, and you're actually going to go live your life intentionally, with deliberation, with meaning and value and purpose. So that's the kind of attitude or disposition that philosophers have in the approach to life. And actually, that's my desire for you, whether you're one of my students or just happen to come along this video randomly on YouTube. My desire for you is that you take a philosophical attitude or disposition, that you begin to live life intentionally, figuring out the answer to these important questions so that you can live an abundant, flourishing life. That's my desire for you. All right, that's it. We'll see you next time.